It's common knowledge that entrepreneurs put in long nights and sacrifice basically everything for the benefit of their companies. But here's a curveball for you. If the success of your business meant stepping down as CEO, could you do it? Today, we're talking to Matt Hoffman, the founder and former CEO of Monarchs, who stepped away to make room for growth, and Jeremy Warren, the current CEO. They'll be joined by investor Gavin Christensen to bring you both sides of A Perfect Pitch. What is Perfect Pitch? It's a podcast from Kickstart that reveals the minds of both investors and entrepreneurs throughout a startup's journey. So whether that's uncovering what everyone's really thinking during a startup pitch or learning how entrepreneurs like you have managed their first major roadblock, Perfect Pitch offers an honest, quick, and tactical guide to help you on your startup journey. I'm your host, Karen Zelnick. Gavin, Jeremy, Matt, thank you so much for joining us today.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Excited to be here again.
Going to be a great discussion. I'm going to give a quick bio for each of you. Jeremy, we're going to start with you. You graduated from MIT with a computer science and engineering degree. Is that correct?
Actually, I am the prototypical MIT dropout. Okay. I left my senior year to join a startup and never looked back.
I was going to say, haven't looked back since. That's amazing.
My parents are about to get over it any day.
Nice. That's good. And before joining Monarchs, you worked at Vivint as the VP of Innovation, Chief Technology Officer, and Strategic Advisor to the CEO. Anything else you'd like us to know about you?
I spent close to 10 years at Vivint, moved out here to Utah for 2Gig, which was an incubated startup from Vivint. I joined Vivint. And before that, spent some time in government at DOJ, and earlier to that, in startups back in Boston.
Okay, so you've got a lot of insights. Okay, I'm excited to get into the discussion here. It's going to be great. And Matt, you graduated from Stanford with a bachelor's degree in economics. You're currently the vice president of Decathlon Capital Partners. And before Monarchs, you were the CEO for Panoptic Security.
I was the former CEO of Monarchs and then also ran a company for a short time called Panoptic that was in Fund 1, Kickstart's first fund.
Did you spend some time at vSpring Capital, which is Gavin also worked there too? Did you overlap at all?
I did, yeah. In fact, that's how Gavin and I met each other. We sat next to each other for a while at vSpring and really cut our teeth. I was new to Salt Lake and Gavin was an easygoing dude who would listen to my crazy ideas. So we got along well.
Yeah, lots of great stories from that time. One is how Matt got the job. He just walked in.
Yeah, I walked in off the street. I didn't know anyone in Utah, no family, no connection. I knew that they had a capital officer, who did hiring. And I literally physically walked in and said, "Hey, I'd like to meet with this person." And they said, "Do you have a meeting?" And I said, "No." And luckily, he came out and then just wheeled my way in and saying, "Hey, I'm from California. I moved out here. And I've done a startup before and I wanted to introduce myself." And that led to an interview with the fund, actually. It was a bizarre way to get a job.
It was impressive. Well, Matt's always had an incredible ability to sell. And then I think within the week, we'd seen Matt challenge some of the senior partners in front of everyone. We're like, all right, this is going to be awesome.
You're like, this is only going to get better from here. That's so good.
That's funny. I describe that period as being the most behaved period of my life. Because I didn't have any friends, didn't know anyone, was from out of town.
So good. And Gavin, welcome back to the show. For those who are new, we're going to have a link to Gavin's bio along with Jeremy's and Matt's in our show notes. But Gavin, to help return listeners get to know you a little bit better, why don't you tell us about what you're currently reading?
Well, I'm actually listening to a book called Caste, which is exploring some of the societal and racial roots of our current system and really comparing it to India, which is pretty provocative, actually, and it really has helped open my mind. And then I just finished a detailed biography of Churchill, which I found incredibly inspiring.
I always like asking you because I feel like I always love what you're reading and I just put it on my to-read list. So I already had Caste, so I'll just put the Churchill biography. Well, so glad to have you back. And now we're just going to jump into the discussion. So Matt, you have a long history as an entrepreneur. As mentioned, you were the CEO for Panoptic Security before founding Monarchs. Tell us a little bit about Monarchs. what it does, and then why it was enticing to be a founder again. Tell us about that journey.
I think it started because I had gone through these transitions in my career where I had worked at startups or worked in venture or been on part of the founding team, but not really the CEO or the core founder. And I'd gone through these cycles of building those companies and sometimes selling them. And then interestingly, I took huge amounts of time off in between some of those companies. So at one stretch, I think it was 13 months. And another stretch, I took 19 months in between jobs. And I spent a ski season in Europe. I rode a motorcycle through Baja. I did other things other than work, even though every responsible person in my life always told me not to do it, especially when I was younger. They were like, your resume, what are you going to do about your resume? And in fact, the reason I got a job at vSpring is because one of the partners likes to ride motorcycles. And he said, well, what have you been doing for the last 2 years? And I said, well, actually riding a motorcycle around Mexico. And he's like, oh, awesome.
You're hired.
That's all we talked about for 30 minutes. Yeah. So I did those periods of working a lot and then taking time off. And after I was coming off my last time off, it sort of occurred to me that I was always really critical of the CEOs that I worked for and sometimes critical of the other founders in probably a way that somebody who doesn't have children would be critical of parents. It's pretty difficult to throw stones if you've never really done it yourself. So in this case, I just said, I'm not young anymore. And if I'm going to do this again, I better do it now. And if I'm going to do it, I kind of want to make it mine. And so I really put it together myself through my own network with my own resources, and then raised money from people that I had already worked with in the past, that already knew me, that I had some track record with. So really, it was sort of my child, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. That was why I wanted to do it. So what does Monarchs do? This is where my wife tells me not to talk about this at parties. She literally would say, nobody wants to know this. No one wants to understand this. So Monarchs protects web servers from intrusions. And there are ways that you can insert these tiny little files called web shells. And web shells are essentially command and control mechanisms. So you can log in and tell the file to go do other things inside of the system. You can pretty much do whatever you want once you insert one of these things inside of a web server. So that's what Monarchs does. It's an unsolved problem in the cybersecurity space. And really, it's a very painful problem for a lot of people that is really hard to stop for a bunch of reasons we could potentially talk about later. But that's what they do, is they stop these intrusions into websites. And bizarrely, cybersecurity is not something that I know a ton about. Monarchs was a company that was really born of my two other co-founders. They were the technical people behind the idea. I wouldn't have known a WAF from network security to save my life at that stage. But I also kind of have a history of doing companies in new verticals that I don't really know. I'm a very strong believer that you can kind of learn most industries in a year and a half. I've done banking software. I've done fingernails for women in the cosmetics world. I've done credit card company, a cybersecurity company. I've just been all over the map. So cybersecurity didn't scare me. It was actually really kind of interesting and fun. It was extremely intellectually engaging after my last job that wasn't very intellectually engaging. Also really hot, growing space. The argument is going to get more and more prevalent in our just existence on planet Earth, that everything is going to have a cybersecurity component and a connectivity component. So I was really attracted to those things about it.
Definitely something that I feel like I need to know more about.
That's exactly how people respond at parties. They sort of nod their head and then they say, I need to go get a drink or something.
Yeah.
And they walk away.
Wow.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And it impacts us all in ways that we don't even know. And so I'm glad that Monarchs is here. And Gavin, Panoptic Security was a Kickstart portfolio company. You already had a relationship with Matt. How did your experience with his leadership skills impact your decision to invest?
Good entrepreneurship is good process. And Matt, despite his success, is a guy that really believes in the process. So he immediately went to work learning as much about the space as anybody, doing 100 interviews with people in the space, and really found a really interesting problem and solution set that we could execute against. That's the next part of the story, which is that solution was really hard to actually create.
So Matt, was it harder than you thought it was going to be?
Yeah, on a couple of levels. That inherent in that question about imagine assumes that I even understand how to solve these problems, or that I understand the mechanisms through which these problems are created, which I don't. And that's the defining reason why this was such a struggle for me is because I don't write code. I'm not an MIT dropout. I couldn't even read the files that we were looking for, much less write the software and the algorithms to find them. So I was very dependent on other people to really execute. Imagine I said, hey, we're going to go build a 4-story house tomorrow. And you're like, well, I'm not a general contractor. That's sort of where I was at. I can sit and talk to engineers about software. I'd worked at software companies most of my career, but I could never really write that code and solve those problems. So yes, it was much harder than I could ever understand because I didn't really understand it fundamentally. And I think also the guys that I originally tried to solve the problem with didn't have a full understanding of it either, which, Gavin will tell you is not uncommon in venture funded scenarios. You jump in the pool, what you're really relying on is everybody knows how to swim and will learn how to swim and learn how to solve these problems. And, we made lots of progress, but there was a reason this is an unsolved problem in the cybersecurity space. The old cliche about if it was easy, everyone would be doing it. That's true. This is really difficult to solve and it causes real economic pain. And there are real buyers who are willing to spend money if you can solve this problem, but it's just not easy to do. Jeremy can tell you in much greater detail why, but that was the defining problem of the first couple of years of the company. And we did meetings with literally 120 or 130 different companies and asked them all about this problem. We were just years behind in terms of being able to actually execute on solving the problem. A lot of solutions in the space are sold to people based on fear, and they don't really solve a problem. It's the old idea of like, you should really make sure you don't get hacked and you should buy this software, and it doesn't really solve the problem.
Jeremy, I want to hear from you. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I call it scare a CISO sales. It's something bad might happen to you 6 months down the road, a year down the road. Do you want to be the person that the board is looking at saying, why didn't you try to do something about this, and getting fired for it? And there are a lot of decisions in cybersecurity that buy software just based on that kind of decision matrix.
Okay, so you're 3 years into the company, Matt. This is where Jeremy comes into the story. Can you tell us more about how you connected and how the decision of Jeremy take over Monarchs came into play?
I guess to preface that a little bit, there were 2 dynamics that were happening that led to the discussion even to bring someone like Jeremy in. The first dynamic was that I've never found a vertical market where more people wanted what we were selling. It was bizarre. Every single company that we went and talked to, they said, this is one of our top 2 engineering problems. And we have 35 full-time employees working on blah, blah, blah. It was millions of dollars they were spending to solve this problem. This is every salesman's dream. You go in and say, is your water running? Yes, our water's been running for 6 months. Well, hey, I have a way to shut the water off. Great, because our building is flooded. That's literally what we were hearing. And literally, we were this rinky-dink startup with 6 or 8 people. And we'd say to these big companies, will you test the software? And they'd say, yes, next week. Put you at the top of the list. And that's really uncommon. There's lots of startups that go out and have a solution and they really can't find people to test it, or they don't really fit where they think they fit. And there's no product market fit is the way people would refer to it. That was not our problem. So I was extremely excited. I was going to the board telling them, boy, we're going to get people to buy this relatively quickly for big amounts of money. Very, very promising on the demand side. And then the issue was that when we first started testing it, it wouldn't work, or that we would cause problems on their servers or have other issues, which of course isn't uncommon to startups either, that you have to get around those things. So we just set about trying to execute. And literally, I had a salesman that didn't have much to do during that period because I had to tell him to stop, because we had way more demand than we could ever have fulfilled near term. And then I started going through a series of engineering hires to try and solve the problem. And again, being ignorant as I am in that world, I was really relying on the CTO or my lead engineers or my VP of engineering to tell me, hey, how are we going to solve this problem? How long is it going to take? How much money is it going to take? And I was participating in those conversations, but I never felt like I really understood. And that created a dynamic where I was missing my expectations with the board, where I would go back and say, I think we got it solved. And then we put it in and it wouldn't work. And then I'd go back to the board and say, well, we're not solved yet. We need to hire this one other person. And another 3 months. And then I'd go back and say, okay, it's working again. And we're going to put it in. And then it would work for a little while and then it would break. We went through that cycle, which was just terribly frustrating to me because we're trying to build a wall and I can't participate in the bricklaying. It was heartbreaking to me because it was an apple that we could just pick right off the tree, and it just wasn't happening. We just couldn't get it done. So I had to make some pretty difficult decisions that sort of wrecked some personal relationships and let some people go and try and upgrade the kind of people we were hiring. And then another thing happened, which was engineers are kind of a fickle bunch. They're a goofy bunch. And I'm sure they'd say the same about salespeople, but they don't really want to come work for a salesman. They want to come work for another hotshot engineer. And that's totally understandable to me. So I struggled recruiting. This problem that we're trying to solve is complex enough that you really need top shelf people to solve it. They tend to be expensive. They tend to already have awesome jobs, like Jeremy in both cases.
Yeah.
And they tend to be very smart and very headstrong about how they want to solve the problem. And I remember literally I went home and talked to my wife and I said, boy, I'm struggling. I don't know what to do. I don't want to burn all this money and disappoint my investors. And this is our third iteration of trying to solve the problem. And it's so frustrating because we have all this demand. And my wife said, well, if you were going to find someone to run the company, who would that person be? And I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, what would the resume be? Like, tell me what would be on this person's resume. And I literally said, I want an MIT computer scientist. I want someone with a cybersecurity background, both of which I don't have. And I would like someone who has like 15 years of experience. She said, that's not you. That's not what you're good at. And I said, I know that. And that really sort of stuck in my head for the next couple of weeks. I was like, this is not me. I'm not going to be able to solve this problem. And then I started thinking, well, I can stick around and sell. As soon as we get this thing built, then I will really be able to do what I do well. So I never really thought about leaving completely. And that over the course of the next couple of weeks, when I considered talking to the board about it, if you have good communication with your board, there's no possible way you're going to raise the subject of replacing yourself without causing all kinds of political problems, because they've really invested in you. And we had just taken on a new round less than a year prior. So there are some pretty fixed expectations about me being involved in the project, unless they marched me out of the office and fired me, which I always told them they could. Had the board come to me and said, hey, we think we need to make a change, I would have listened. But I knew that even having the conversation was basically going to cause problems. So then it was just a question of like, hey, do I try and hire a CTO? Then I kept thinking, well, if I want someone who is as good as I would like to recruit, who could really solve this problem, they're going to want to run the company. And then what am I going to do? I'm going to sit around waiting for the problem to be solved. So that was kind of what led up to making a decision to try and find someone of Jeremy's caliber, which, to be totally honest, there was no way we were ever going to be able to attract Jeremy.
Well, we talked, right? I mean, we talked a year earlier about it. Yeah. When we first met, I was introduced to Matt and the team by a common friend in Salt Lake City. And based on what I was already doing and based on where Monarchs was, it just didn't make sense. It wasn't interesting enough.
It was like Monarchs or Vivint for the same role. Which one would you choose?
Yeah.
I remember telling Gavin and the board, hey, I don't think he's a real candidate for us, until we started talking about him running the company himself, which I think is something Jeremy can speak to, but he had communicated to me that he had aspirations to do that relatively soon. And frankly, it made more sense because the stage the company was at and what the company needed, it was Jeremy's resume. Then we started talking about it, and we're interviewing a couple of other people as well. But every single person I looked at was heavy tech, CTO their whole career, coder by trade. When we were selling it, I couldn't even sell it because we were selling it to a CTO of a hosting company who would ask all these esoteric questions that I wasn't able to answer. I had to bring my VP of engineering to every sales call. So we needed a person like that. And I think that's proven to be a good decision.
Yeah, totally. And Gavin, a CEO transition like this doesn't happen every day. As Matt mentioned, it was a tough conversation with the board. How involved were you with this decision, and what were you thinking during this time?
I mean, it was definitely tricky, but I think as we thought about it and talked through it, it's just hard to imagine a scenario where Matt didn't feel like this was the right answer.
It's weird to look back on it a year later, because at the time, like, I could not sleep. Mm-hmm. I did not sleep a full night for weeks. I'm from like a crappy little town in Illinois. My family didn't come from money. The fact that someone would write me a $3 million check so that I can build a company is still amazing to me. So to throw my hands up and say, I don't want to do this anymore, I'm going to walk away, that wasn't an option for me. And so I lost a lot of sleep over it about how can I thread the needle, because I really felt strongly it was the right thing to do tactically for the business. But then emotionally, like, I'd spent 3 years getting to know all these people and building it and loved going to work and liked the people I worked with. And Gavin and I have a friendship that's 17 years old. I don't want to blow that up over something like this. I mean, I remember I flew down to Los Angeles to talk to our other investors, and I was like almost in tears. I just was like, look, I don't know how to do this. And they were not psyched about it. So it was a pretty difficult scenario for me.
I can feel that. I can feel the weight of this decision.
I hope Jeremy understands how much pressure is on him for me emotionally.
Do you, Jeremy? I feel like you're the man of the hour. We really now it's over to you, Jeremy. Like,
I'm just kidding. Everything's fine.
So many questions for you.
My main thoughts as I'm listening to this, number one, Matt is really selling himself short. It's not like someone coming in with a deep technology background. All of a sudden it's like, oh, there's a clear path to solving this thing. And just Matt was blind. And now like, I've got vision for this. No, this is hard. A deep technologist trying to solve this problem would go through multiple iterations of thinking they knew what they were doing, realizing they didn't, having to adjust, move to the next thing. So this is a bit more complicated. And the other thing I'm thinking is that I hope people are talking about me this positively a year from now.
Yeah.
As opposed to just today.
We hope so too, Jeremy. I'm just kidding.
That can be part 2 to the podcast, right? It's like, how does the board feel about Jeremy in 2022?
And I do think that's maybe a unique aspect of just this story. Just like, hey, we're still in this. Now, Jeremy has accomplished some important things. Matt stayed really involved here, but we're still on the journey here. There's still a fight.
Oh, for sure.
I would say, though, Gavin, that I think the company has a substantially greater likelihood of succeeding in a way that will be accretive to your returns in your fund than it would have.
Oh, for sure.
If you look at it from my perspective, it's coming in as a CEO to someone else's company that was started and there's something they want to leave. It's like the number one assumption is this thing has hair all over it, that this guy is like trying to get out of here, that what in the world? And so, no, for me, the number one thing is this a real thing, or is this just a dog and pony show to go and take up something that he wants to get away from as quickly as possible? And to see the emotional attachment and the commitment and the passion that Matt had, I wouldn't be here otherwise.
Yeah. And a year in, how are you feeling about it?
I'm loving it. Matt talked a little bit about what got him to want to be a CEO the first time. It was similar for me. And in particular, it was feeling like I would get to a place where I had a really passionate sense of what I thought was right to be done, what I thought the right course was. And it's like, I want to go and see if I can do this myself. And being a CEO for me was about all of that. It was about the accountability, the ownership, the pressure, the leadership that was required, and hopefully invigorating myself with that. For that, check, it's done it.
So my guess is that, Matt, you're sleeping a little better a year into the decision. Jeremy, you're probably sleeping a little worse. Gavin, how are you sleeping?
Didn't sleep last night at all, but it's not Monarchs. How about that?
Not because of Monarchs, because there's 100 other companies.
To ask Gavin. Yeah.
As you said earlier, Gavin, that we're still in the middle of Monarchs' story. And so it's going to be so interesting to see how this pans out. I've loved the discussion we've had around the fact that these are hard decisions. Matt, we can feel how much that weighed on you. Jeremy, you weren't sold in the beginning, and then there were things that had to be in place for that to happen. And it's just such a fascinating story. And I'm excited to see it play out. So we'll be keeping an eye on you. We'll be having you back on the podcast in another year. It's going to be great. But I do have one final question for each of you. What's an effective practice that you've implemented in your work or personal life that's had the greatest impact on your success?
In terms of practices that I feel like have been effective for me, I would say that I have a sincere belief that I can learn just about anything I need to learn. Maybe short of coding, I would say that. I'm too old for that. But I'm not afraid of the process of being dumb, of being in a room and saying, I don't know what that means. Can someone explain it to me? And if someone does explain it to me, I will learn it. And pretty soon after a year, I will have a pretty good grasp of whatever I'm working on. I just don't see how anyone can succeed without constantly learning stuff, learning new things. That to me requires an element of humility where you have to be comfortable in a room and raising your hand saying, I don't know what WAF means. Jeremy, I looked at our notes from Monarchs, and the first week of me working there, I didn't know what a web application firewall is, which is just laughable given what I was about to set off and try and do. I'm sure lots of people laughed at me in the first 6 months of these meetings. I probably asked really stupid questions. And I would say that's maybe the thing that has allowed me to do what I do, which is I just don't really care that I don't know that stuff. If someone explains it to me or I can read about it, I'll get there. And then I will be effective after that. I can't imagine staying in the same industry for your whole career. That just seems like a punishment to me.
Everyone listening who has to this point is now like, oh, great.
No, they're really lucky. They have all these connections and they know everyone and it's easy to get a job. There's all these advantages of that. Trust me.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I think that's a really interesting insight and takeaway. I've been taking notes and I love it. And Jeremy, I'd love to hear from you.
Just a practice that I'm committed to is just really being transparent and open with folks, to really try to take on hard conversations earlier. I just think that in the end, there's value to having people rely upon what you're saying, even as it's creating sometimes short-term problems in terms of creating more visibility for stuff that sometimes people aren't going to completely understand or they might overreact to.
Thank you. And Gavin, I'd love your thoughts on how these concepts of humility and learning and curiosity and then trust and transparency have positively affected Monarchs.
Well, I think we see here a very difficult situation and set of decisions that often doesn't go this well. And so I think you can clearly see how the learning aspect of what Matt's talking about kept himself aware enough to come to a really hard truth about the situation that few founders are able to have that level of self-awareness. So I think it's a real strength. With Jeremy, that's really enabled him to hop in the job as the CEO and learn and really improve quickly and get to a point where he's really executing well and learn from Matt. These are all qualities that I think many of us would really benefit by trying to apply these better in our roles and really saying, hey, how do we have this company, whatever I'm part of, succeed? And it may mean that I might need to change roles. It may mean that I need to learn something that I don't know or admit something about myself that's hard. But that's what the best companies do to get to success. Rarely is it a straight line up and to the right, as these gentlemen know, and we all know. The norm is always a little more challenging than that typically. So I think this is a great illustration of how these qualities are contributing to success.
I think you've really just summed up the conversation perfectly right there. So we can just end on that. Another thing I wrote down on my notes too that I circled is trust. The trust that you first had in Matt to start the company, and then Jeremy was to join the company and take on that role, and Gavin trusting that Matt was making the right decision. It's just so vital, the connections you make in startups, the need to establish relationships of trust throughout the entire process. So thank you all so much for being here. Really appreciate your willingness to be candid and to talk about the hard aspects of startups. So appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having us. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for having us, Karen.
And of course, thank you for listening as we dive deep into what it takes to create the perfect pitch. If you want to learn more about our investor, Gavin Christensen from Kickstart, or Jeremy Warren, Matt Hoffman, and Monarchs, we'll have a link to the company and a longer bio in our show notes at kickstartfund.com. You can listen to more episodes of Perfect Pitch wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you like what you're learning, leave us a review or rating. We'll be back next time with more insights from the entrepreneurs and the investors who fund them. So be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a thing.